Welcome, everybody. This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 22. Today we have Pete Strouse. Pete is an information security recruiter. He's been in the game for about a decade, and he's going to educate everybody today on how to get into the cybersecurity field, and then once you get in it, how to move up the ladder, how to pick great jobs, how to avoid the bad ones, and everything in between. Pete, thanks for being with us, man. I'm excited about this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Christian, for having me on.
Yeah, I think this is timely. I think careers in cybersecurity seem to be the most controversial topic in our space right now, for one reason or another. I'd love to get your background. How did you get into the recruiting game, and how did you kind of become an entrepreneur? How did you get where you are?
Yeah, kind of an interesting path. I never thought I would end up in recruiting, really, of all things. I went to school and got my MBA and wanted to move down to Florida, so I did. And in doing so, I interviewed with a recruiting company known as Kforce down here in Florida, and basically just took the first entry-level job I could get. And they had me working on a bunch of technology positions, and it just kind of clicked to me. It just kind of made sense. I understood the terminology and being able to kind of view patterns on people's resumes and things. And so I worked on a lot of really technical positions that other folks couldn't figure out, and kind of parlayed that experience into a position over at Align, and basically built their HR and recruiting departments from scratch and hired over 100 people in 2.5 years. And those are mostly IT auditors, pen testers, security and compliance assessors, and then some back office folks. And having been on that side of the fence for a consulting firm and building it from the inside out, I think that gave me sort of a pretty unique perspective,
Yeah.
what it takes to build a security company. And then for the last 4 years or so, been recruiting and running my own security consulting recruiting firm, and helping security companies and corporations find good security people, and helping those security people also understand how to basically get through all of the red tape associated with hiring good security people. So
Great. Yeah, so I thought we could break this conversation up into a few chunks. One, maybe talk about like how to get into cybersecurity if you have no background in it. You're trying to either transition or you're a new college grad or something like that. Two, if you're in the field, like how do you move up the ladder? I'm very curious to see like how you see people move into leadership positions in the security. And then lastly, if you're a company, how do you spot good candidates, or how do you avoid losing good candidates, depending on your perspective? So we start off on like new to the field, want to get into cybersecurity. What's your recommendation? How do you break in?
So there's a lot of people looking to break into the field right now, and common complaints I hear is nobody's hiring entry level, nobody's willing to train, it's tough to break into the field, and all of that is absolutely true. One common thing that I hear from a lot of security hiring managers is, well, security is not really an entry level field. It's a subset of technology, and then you need to have technology experience before you can get into security. And so I think what a lot of people struggle with is they're being fed this line by security certification companies and degree programs that, hey, get a degree, get X, Y, and Z certification, and then you'll get a job in security. And that's not really happening. Hiring managers are looking for a couple of years of experience in technology before they're willing to hire somebody into a security role. So like the single best most important thing I think that you can do is gain experience in some sort of technology role, even if it's help desk or something pretty entry level. I think what a lot of folks struggle with is they go through all this schooling and they have all these student loans, or they spent a fortune on certifications, and now they're not able to get that job without taking maybe a $15 an hour help desk job to start off. So my advice to folks is always try and start off at the beginning, entry level. Try and get some technology experience however you can. If you can get an internship while you're in school, that's great. Really, it's about that hands-on experience in tech versus certifications and degrees. While those are great to have, it's going to be tougher to get a job if you don't have that quote-unquote hands-on experience that even SOC managers are looking for.
Yeah. I think there's certain careers that lend themselves to entry level, because I got into security, quote unquote security, right out of college with not much of a technology. I wasn't even a technology person. Like I could use a computer, but outside of that, I had never done anything with security. But I got in on the auditing world. I went to one of the big accounting firms, became a SOC 2 auditor and did some PCI work, et cetera, and then kind of cut my teeth in security frameworks and then kind of moved into security. Are there, for people trying to get into the field, are there like a few common like career trajectories or places to start? Because if you're trying to get into security, people think like pen testing, they think like a network operations center or threat hunting, but the security is a lot more than that. You know, it's also auditing and stuff like that. Are there careers or entry level points that you see that companies are hiring, you know, fresh college grads or people transitioning out of IT into security?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. When people think of security, they think of those quote-unquote sexier disciplines like pen testing, or in some cases like DFIR. They think SOC analyst. They don't necessarily think, oh, I could become an auditor. But that's actually a really common entry point to get into the field, and then a lot of people will parlay that security compliance experience into a more technical role in some cases. And, you know, like you said, there's a ton of large firms that are hiring people directly out of college programs that have campus recruiting programs. And, you know, that's part of their solution to mitigate the workforce shortage, is bring in a bunch of people through their campus recruiting program, train them up, get them ready to at least become an auditor. And then once you do that, you see a bunch of environments for clients, and it's a great way to break into the field. So I think more people ought to consider a career in auditing, at least to start. I think it takes a certain mindset and a certain attention to detail that maybe some technology people don't have. And that's what a lot of people struggle with, is working for accountants and being able to produce error-free work and not so much focus on the tech, but the work product that I think auditing sometimes requires. That's sort of the challenge there. But certainly plenty of demand in auditing right now. I mean, right now, senior SOC auditors, it seems like every firm out there is looking for senior SOC auditors.
Yeah.
Same thing with ISO or High Trust, or, you know, whatever it may be.
Name your alphabet soup of compliance framework. There's plenty of job openings. But I mean, we posted a job. We posted a few jobs. So we posted a PCI job post at Risk 360. We posted a SOC 2 job. I think each of those got like, over the course of the first 3 days, got like 20 or 25. But then we posted one for like a security consultant, and one for a pen tester. And I think between those two, we had like 400 applicants. So like, I think I don't know what, and most of them, by the way, were in no way qualified to do that job. There was like 10, like, so it was a bad applicant pool. But there seems to be some phenomena of people who are trying to break into the security world don't know what jobs to look for. You know, they don't, like, how do you get into this space? What are most of your entry level candidates? Do they kind of know when they come, like, I'm looking for this, or are you coaching them through that, or do they have an idea of what the career is? How do the entry level candidates approach you?
Well, and really, I'm talking to a lot of entry level people just through, you know, speaking engagements like this and referrals and stuff like that. I don't generally work with clients that'll pay me to find them entry level folks, because, like you mentioned, you know, put up one job posting and then you get a ton of applicants for those type of jobs. So generally speaking, my clients don't pay me to go find them entry level folks. But you know, I think the best thing that people in that position can do is to reach out to those hiring managers directly. There's a sense, I think, that we as recruiters can help you find a job no matter what your situation, and no matter what our job openings look like. That's not necessarily true. You know, we pretty much have to have an opening to present you to, versus find a good candidate and then go find them a job. It doesn't really work that way. It's, you know, push versus pull, or pull versus push, depending on how you want to look at it. So really, your best case scenario as an entry level candidate, really as any candidate, I would say, is try and get in front of hiring managers directly. Best way to do that: network, go to meetup groups, go to meetup.com, type in security, cybersecurity. You know, you'll find groups on there. ISACA, ISSA, ISC squared, stuff like that. Really network with those people that are in your target position or would be a target hiring manager for you, in making those relationships directly, forming those relationships directly, versus trying to go through a recruiter at all times. A lot of internal recruiters, they may be great generalist recruiters, but they may not be a great security recruiter. They may not understand the technology well enough to be effective at it. So your best case is just to talk to the decision makers.
Yeah, I agree. I think networking's key. Just standing out in general, because when I'm getting 300 applications, unless it's just a ball-in resume, like someone who's just like, wow, like, it's hard to even give someone a chance, because like they all kind of look the same. They're talking points. But the people who reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, in addition to applying, the people who send the writing samples, I've gotten a few times. We've done a case study or have a portfolio they can point back to. Just any little thing to stand out if you're an entry level candidate is, to me, like worth taking a shot, because that person did just a little bit extra to stand out and get off the stack of resumes.
Well, and even being able to describe, a special project that you had in school and how that aligns specifically to a given job or a given company's focus. If you had a master's in digital forensics and you worked on a particular project where you're doing memory analysis and you noticed their job posting said that, they're looking for experience with volatility, you can say, well, I did that, X, Y, and Z class or project. Just being very specific. In my experience, specifics really sell. Both, me as a recruiter, if I'm trying to present a candidate for an open position, I want to make sure that as many specifics as I have to sell that person for that job, I'm presenting those, and those are very obvious to the hiring manager. You can do the same thing as a direct applicant as well. And like you said, being proactive and showing exactly why that specific experience or that specific interest aligns with a given job. That's ideal.
So moving into like the more experienced candidates, because that's, I imagine, where most of your experience is in the placement services. So where are the jobs? Are there like, is it across the board, cybersecurity is just hiring? Is there certain industries or verticals that you're seeing like really hot right now?
Yeah, and it's tough as a recruiter to be in the know as far as every single subset of information security. I have a few specialties that I see a lot of demand for right now. I can say specifically IT audit, security assessors, DFIR. Really, any of those folks with that experience are in demand right now. And I think in general, just the industry is desperately crying out for good people. And I think long term, we need to get more people into the field overall. And the way to do that is through starting in grade school and things like that. But as far as the demand that I'm seeing right now, SOC auditors, security assessors, really any type of auditors with any type of compliance background are in demand right now. Incident response folks with consulting experience that are doing breach response and forensic investigations, those are always going to be in demand. Experienced pen testers, always going to be in demand. But then there's so many people that want to become a pen tester, but they don't know how to break into the field. That there's still a shortage of experienced pen testers, or folks that are able to get past those HR roadblocks to get those jobs, even if the jobs exist and there's enough people to fill them. Part of the problem is just there's so many roadblocks between good people and good jobs that they'd be a fit for. People can't get through to the jobs, and I see that all day.
Yeah, there's like a donut, I always call it. Like there's people at the bottom, there's people at the top, but like there's no mid-level people, because it's like it's hard to bridge that gap, The other phenomenon I see is like folks who have jumped jobs like every year or every 2 years or sometimes less. And I think there's this strong desire there's this opportunity in security where you can get paid to jump ship over and over again because there's such demand. And we were talking about this a little bit, but what do you think when you're advising candidates and you're looking for like world-class companies that just do great in retention versus, I'm sure you have some companies you love to poach from that people are just like, jumping out of there, leaving like a sinking ship. Are there some trends that you can see? Like, what are the great companies doing to keep people, to attract people versus the bad companies that people are fleeing from?
I think with how much security work there is to be done, and I work with a lot of consulting firms, that seems to be kind of my sweet spot. With how much work there is to be done, there's a tendency, I think, to overwork people and to have them more utilized than they would like to be. So consulting firms, especially, I think in general, are just overworking people, and part of the reason that happens is there's just too much work to be done and not enough people to do it. So I think the companies that are really holding on to people, they understand, especially at the executive level, maybe they're a former consultant themselves, so they understand what it's like to be a consultant and what it's like to be fully utilized all the time and to have to try to balance work life and family life. So I would say really just the one thing that a company can do better than anybody else to hang on to people is just don't overwork them. And that's easier said than done, I know. especially when you don't have enough people and you're looking for more, and you just can't get people into the interview process fast enough. But to be able to balance utilization in the case of consulting firms well enough to where people aren't just overworked, that's the single greatest thing. Another thing would be just listening to people. It's super simple, but people that feel like they're not heard, they're more likely to go leave and work for somebody who will hear them and listen to their suggestions. I hear that a lot from people in security operations centers, where there's just this general idea that this is the way things are, fit into our culture, do things the way we do it, and that's how it is. So just hearing your employees, listening to suggestions. You might have a good suggestion from somebody who's basically entry level that might not cost anything to implement in some cases. Why wouldn't you want to hear that suggestion? But I think generally there's this idea that, you're working for us, follow the status quo, and that tends to drive a lot of people out.
Yeah, I also think some of the burdens on the candidate. So I'm kind of mixed feelings here, because one phenomenon I see is like you have a security person who's trying to bring security recommendations to the fore, and they, like you said, they just can't get heard. So it's very easy to be disheartened. And there's a security problem. I bring it up every year. It's always an audit finding, but I'm not getting any budget or any resources to actually fix it. And then I also see it on the flip side, where as a security practitioner, you need to be able to communicate the business case effectively into why you want that security thing rolled out. And there's somewhere, the truth's somewhere in the middle. The company needs to listen, and the security folks need to learn how to articulate that. Are there companies out there that you can just never get anyone to leave from, or that are just known for having great cultures, and you're like, yeah, they have super high retention that you know about, or just well respected in the recruiting community?
I think in general, if you dig down to it, there's always something as a recruiter that I can unearth that would make somebody leave any company. I think if I'm an effective recruiter, I can do that, and I can get to the bottom of that. Having said that, I think some factors that differentiate those companies that tend to have higher retention are, like we were talking about, just listening to people, good benefits. I'm a big proponent of not making a move every 6 months for more money, but at the same time, you got to have benefits for your family. You got to have enough pay to support yourself. And I think people in general do leave if they're underpaid, and that is driving a lot of turnover in the industry. But I would say the companies that have the best cultures, they do have weekly meetings or stand-ups or something, and they're not just a formality. They're actually something that people look forward to, and team building events and stuff like that, as cliche as it is, just having team building events goes a long way. Some of the best consulting firms I can think of to work for, again, they have a really strong focus on making sure people aren't overly utilized, that they're actually paid for any above and beyond hours that they may be working, so performance-based bonuses, companies that reward people for working super long hours versus just expecting that as the norm. So at least people feel that there's some incentive tied to working extra.
What about like mission and culture and values? Because I think in consulting especially, like there's some firms that you hear about that just have strong mission, culture, values, and maybe those are like startups. You just hear about them. You're like, oh, that's a great culture. Or some of us consultants have had the pleasure of working with them. But then in consulting, you can fall on the track of, because everybody's a revenue generating person, consulting companies make money based on people doing billable work. You can let culture fall to the wayside because everyone's overworked. Do you see has that ever come up? And maybe a way to ask the question better, are there companies that you recruit on behalf of that they always get a yes? Like your candidates come back and they're like, that was just a different place. They're awesome to go work for. And if yes, is there reasons beyond like money or just monetary benefits that they're going there?
Yeah, one of the DFIR firms that I work with right now, actually, I tend to have basically everybody that comes out of an interview with these guys, they want the job afterwards, and I think that's a pretty powerful statement. And I think the reason that's happening is, one, the executives are former consultants, so they understand what it's like to be overutilized. Two, their benefit structure is amazing. So people, it's not so much a monetary thing. I think it's more about feeling valued. They're going to give me time off. They're going to incentivize me to take it. It's not just an unlimited plan where everything's ambiguous and I don't know how much time I can take. Or in some cases, it's, I have time off for Christmas and New Year's when it's important for me to have that time off with my family. And company culture, mission-focused type of stuff where you feel like you have an opportunity to affect change, you're aligned with the company goals, that is important too. I think that speaks more to job satisfaction than it does retention. I think to retain people, you just need to have very basic things in place. You need to have enough benefits so that that's not a point of stress for them. You need to pay them well enough so it's not a point of stress for them. And they need to not dislike their job enough to stick around. And keeping people at a reasonable level of work is probably the easiest way to do that. But as far as actually making sure people like what they do, being aligned to the company's goals, and really living those values day to day, because I think a lot of companies say they have certain core values, but then they don't necessarily live those values. But if you have a commitment to quality, for instance, having a strong QA program, if you have a commitment to client service, doing some sort of client service survey or something like that, people like to know that they're working towards a specific goal or with a specific value in mind. That isn't just a phrase that people parrot. It's actually something that they can live day to day.
Yeah. So I think one of our secret sauces is a lot of the intangibles. Of course, we pay well and offer great benefits and stuff. We can put them on the website. But one of the things that as a company it's hard to kind of articulate is the intangibles, like a tight-knit team or best friends at work and transparency at management level and all that kind of stuff. So we talk a lot about that during the interview cycle to provide some transparency to the candidate. But if you're a candidate kind of like going through the interview cycle with a few firms, and you've been in the game for a bit, so you probably kind of have an instinct for these things. But are there things that you would tell a candidate kind of look out for? Like, hey, look, this is an indicator of the firm's probably pretty solid versus, based on my experience, these are red flags that maybe questions they could ask or just like little intangibles that you've noticed?
So one thing that I saw some posting on this that I read somewhere where if you're interviewing in person with a company, try and get a feel for the buzz in the office. And that's kind of hard to do, I think, now with video and phone interviews being the normal. But if you do get the chance to do an in-person interview somewhere, and you just kind of hear the office, is there a buzz to it? Is there a murmur, like a hum to it? You want to hear energy there. If it's dead silent and there's just paper shuffling around, chances are that's probably not a great place to work. Good workplaces have a buzz to them. When you're interviewing virtually, it's tougher to figure out. I like to tell people to kind of ask questions like, how many hours on average do your people work a week? What are expectations as far as when I need to respond to client calls, or when I need to be online? Do you guys have a set of core working hours? Do you have flexible time? Stuff like that. It's important to be able to, take a few hours off if your kid gets sick or something like that. But some companies that's frowned upon, and it's good to know that, I think, going into it, to set expectations in the beginning. I think a lot of folks, there's a lot of turnover because expectations are not properly set in the beginning. So asking as many revelatory questions as you can in the interview process to really dig in there and understand what it's like to work for a company day to day. That's important because you don't want to get into a position and then want to leave 3 months in. So I think doing as much research as you can, looking on Glassdoor, asking questions at the hiring manager, like, what's it like to work day to day in your company? Not just talking to managers, but also talking to, in the consulting world, a senior consultant or a consultant, somebody who's doing the actual work and not just in management. I think that's important too. Understanding what management and executives are looking for, but then also what expectations are from the ground level. If you're a consultant or senior consultant, how many reports do you put out a week? How many hours are you working a week? Just try and get as many specifics as you can. Again, it's easy to get caught up in vision and opportunity and things like that, very high level things, but I found the devil is in the details. Try and get as specific as you can in your questions, I would say.
Yeah, I try to encourage candidates to do that because I think people want the job. They have some needs. They're in Maslow's. They need like food in their mouth. So when we were doing interviewing, I always like afford them an opportunity, even to talk offline to like a senior consultant or something, someone who's not a boss in the business, and ask specifics like, hey, what do you do if you need to request time off, or what do you think about the vision? Where do you guys think you're going in 5 years? Because I like them to check, like I'll tell them stuff. I'm delivering a vision, like here's where we're heading in 5 years, and we do these PTO things and fun events, but I'm also selling this job here to you. So don't take my word for it. Ask these guys offline. But we try to be that transparent because, again, I think it's the secret sauce to getting top candidates when you're a small firm like we are. But where do you think there's a line? Do you think that kind of thing would be frowned upon, or do you think that other firms would be receptive to that? Like if you're coaching a candidate and they're asking the potential firm hard questions, do you think there's any boundaries there? Like, hey, you shouldn't be that. If you really want the job, be quiet, or do you think hard questions are a good thing?
I don't know. I'm of the opinion that you should be able to ask those kind of questions, and if it's frowned upon, that's probably not a place you want to work. Because, yeah, it's a balancing act. You don't want to come across as too tough to work with in the questions you ask, but those should be questions that you can ask if it's a good place to work. I'm a big candidate advocate in general. As long as you're not being selfish with the questions you're asking and you're not coming across as what's in it for me all the time, which is a trap some people fall into, especially when they're in demand like they are in security, there's a way to phrase things. I think it's all about tonation and how you address certain questions. If you come across as collaborative and just asking questions because you're curious, or if you come across as, well, this is what I expect. As long as you're not coming across as I expect X, Y, and Z, and you're just more so asking because you're curious, I think you should be okay.
Yeah, you need to have the EQ, self-assess. If you think you can get away with asking those questions, you should ask them. You gotta have some tact. What about like tips for companies? Are there things like certain ways that companies are marketing themselves from a candidate recruiting perspective that you seem very effective? Like right now we're on kind of this podcast kick because we're during COVID. We're doing some video. I don't know if that helps or not. I speculate maybe some candidates are looking at those, but maybe they're not. Anything that you're seeing, just like companies that do a really good job recruiting top performers?
I think what you're doing with the podcast is a good idea from a long game perspective. It may not get you, a ton of good candidates in the immediate term, but I think long term it is important. And I am a big advocate in general of building an employer brand where eventually word of mouth will get around and people will start talking about you. There will be a buzz. I think on the ground level, companies that are attracting the best people have the best recruiters working for them, whether that's external or internal to the organization, people that truly understand the terminology and the technology and what it takes to attract good people. Just training your recruiters well enough to understand what security candidates are talking about can go such a long way. I can't count the number of people I talk to that they're like, wow, you really know what you're talking about. I've worked with so many terrible recruiters, it's a breath of fresh air. So having your hiring managers educate those people that are representing your employer brand out there in the marketplace is so important. And there's, like I said, so many poorly trained recruiters out there that just, and it's not their fault, they just haven't had the training to understand what they need to understand to properly represent the company. So part of that employer brand, taking it to market, is educating those recruiters. And again, the details sell, really helping candidates understand what it's like to work day to day at your organization, what's great about your group versus another group within the organization, what team building events you do, what your benefits look like. All those little details can really help. And so I think really it's just the well-trained recruiters representing the brand in the best possible way that are doing it the best.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you had some thoughts around like what motivates people to stay or leave. Can you talk about that? like the motivations behind doing things?
Yeah, and I've always been big on the psychology of recruiting and motivation and what keeps people staying at an organization long term or what might motivate them to leave. And there's a motivation theory talking, I forget who it was, but you mentioned Maslow. There's another philosopher basically that said there's hygiene theory. So certain hygiene factors keep people in jobs and keep them at least baseline satisfied to where that's not a factor to get them to leave. And things like that are pay or benefits, those hygiene factors, enough to where they're supporting themselves at a basic level. They don't have to worry about it. That's great. But when it comes to truly being empowered and enjoying your work life and what Maslow would call self-actualization, that's talking more about purpose, and that's being aligned to the company goals and objectives, being aligned to your personal goals and objectives. Do you have career trajectory? Do you feel like your work matters? Do you enjoy your management style and the way they treat you? Do you feel like you have an impact on things? Especially smaller firms, it feels like do a great job of helping people understand that they actually do matter, that they're not just a cog in a wheel. So I think a lot of people leave because they don't feel heard or they just feel like a number. So even large companies can do a great job of making people feel like they're not just a number if they feel engaged in their own tiny little group within the larger organization. You could work at Visa in a large security operations center and still feel valued if your management feels that way.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of self-determination theory? By chance, that's kind of like what it sounds like you're describing. They say that motivation is derived from three components: from autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy being like someone's freedom. Like you can, if you need to go to a dentist appointment, you can. If you need to control the way you work, and you can have some control over deadlines and your breaks, just some basic freedom. That's a big part of it. Competence, meaning you have an opportunity to become a craftsman in what you do. So you can really get down and become expert. And it's not too surface level. And then relatedness, kind of what you were just talking about do you feel close to your team? Do you have a good manager? Do you feel like you're on a common mission, rowing in the same direction? And some combination of those things derive motivation. And that's exactly kind of what you're talking about here. But I've heard it be referred to as like the self-determination theory.
I hadn't heard of that theory, but it sounds correct in my experience. There's no magic singular factor that gets somebody to stay somewhere or to be satisfied in the work that they do. It's a combination of things, but those categories, they definitely seem like they would describe pretty well.
Yeah. I went through a whole life cycle. Audit work kind of sucks, like, frankly. Like, it just does. It's not fun to do audit work papers day in and day out. But it is fun to see hundreds of different companies assess their security program. You learn a ton. And so for me, I started my career in audit, and a lot of people do in the assessment and audit space. But I went through this life cycle where probably like a year in, 9 months in, I was like, I can't do this long term. Like, I like security, I like the buzzword, but I had kind of acquired enough knowledge where I kind of knew what I was doing, but also didn't like the work. And I was also getting delegated a lot of grunt work because I was a year into my career. And then past that point, I started becoming what we call craftsmen. Like, there's appreciation in the nuance of work. It's like a woodworker. Mm-hmm. It's like once you're in the nuance and you understand the grains and the type of woods and how they all interact, there's just some enjoyment out of being a hyper expert in almost anything. So you learn to appreciate the grind. And then all of a sudden you become like a management consultant where you're talking about strategy and deeper security, and it becomes really fun. And everything you do is fun. And I feel like a lot of folks can't pass. It's difficult to pass that little curve where it really kind of sucks for a while. And I wonder, and I always think to myself when I see these resumes of people jumping every year or two, and it's like you haven't even been at one company long enough to see a full life cycle, to like see a program come to full maturity, that kind of thing. Are you hearing anything? Are those conversations coming up at all? Like, hey, you need to stick at it for 2-3 years to watch this maturity come to fruition. Because I think security suffers in that because you leave before the job's done and you don't get the satisfaction of it getting done.
Well, and I think again, there's a differentiation there between building a corporate security program internal to a company or being a consultant and working on a different project every 2 weeks. Common complaint I hear from consultants is, well, I'm knocking out a report and then I'm moving on to the next client, and I never get to see the impact of those things that I'm doing. And then, people on the corporate side, they may be with a company for a year or two or even 5 years, and at some point they become stagnant. They feel like, okay, well, I've done the work now. Now it's just maintenance mode. I'm not challenged anymore. So I hear that pretty often. So there's an ebb and flow to it. I'm generally an advocate of people sticking it out for as long as they can, unless they absolutely hate their job. They should try and get to that level of mastery that you're talking about to truly give it a fair shake. I think folks that are moving every 6 or 12 months, they aren't necessarily giving it a fair shake. At the same time, in the consulting world, if you've been with a company for a year, you pretty much know how things are going, especially if they're, if they have 2-week projects. Now, if you have 6 months or a year-long project, that's a different story. But cookie cutter audit firms is a term that I hear pretty often.
I like to try to give. You're right. It is easy to become a cog in a wheel in these audit firms or consulting firms where you're just spitting out audits all day and there's nowhere else to go. You're going to be an auditor for a while. That's bad. But what I'll tell some consultants is like there's craftsmanship in being a consultant. So like beyond delivering the work, there's a whole ecosystem behind how a consulting firm operates. There's this guy named David Maister, I think, that wrote a whole book about how professional services works, whether it be law firms, audit firms, banning consulting. So if you've been in an audit firm for years, like maybe you need to start thinking about how the hierarchy at your own firm works. Like how do you become a manager, and then how do you become a leader in that organization? And even if you can't become a leader there, that's a good insight for the next firm. So maybe like interview the CEO of Align or Shellman or Colfi or any of the usual suspects out there for audit firms, or me over Risk 360, and just figure out like what is the economic engine behind that thing and how do you move up in the ranks. Because you'll find out two things. Either you definitely don't want to be a leader in the consulting game because it's terrible, or you're like, interesting. So there's a game behind the game, and that I can potentially rise up through.
Or if, like you said, you get over that certain hump, and maybe for you that magic role is manager or senior manager, and at that point you start really loving what you're doing, versus being, say, a senior consultant.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's all about interviewing the folks, like you said, that are above you or in that goal where you think you might want to be, and kind of reverse engineering your career from there. And that's the advice that I give a lot of people that maybe don't know what direction they want to go next. Is, all right, well, figure out who's in what you think might be your ideal position. Talk to them about how they got there and why they love what they do, what they don't like about it, and what it takes to get there. And you can kind of reverse engineer your career path from there and figure out what steps you need to take to get to that next level. I don't think enough people think about it in the long game. They get focused on the day-to-day and what they're doing tomorrow and how stressed they are, and they don't think about, okay, well, where could I be in the next 5 years if I continue down this path, or make a strategic change right now and pivot. It might be a decrease in salary for the time being, but maybe it's a better solution for me long term, and I'll be happier overall.
Yeah, I will say there's many good things about the security industry, but one thing that has impressed me is there are a lot of people who are willing to be mentors or have conversations. So if you're like a young consultant or thinking about a pivot, you could probably reach out to just about any like security manager or security executive, and they'd probably give you 15 minutes to do that kind of talk you're talking about there. Just kind of investigate the career. How did you get there? What was your background? Which is really cool. Maybe everyone's like that, but I've noticed specifically in security, it seems like people are like that. What about executives? So cybersecurity executives, what is a CISO? What the hell is a CISO? I don't know. Like, it's different in every organization. Am I the compliance person? Am I over application security? Am I a true leader? Am I actually a C-suite? Have you seen any patterns in terms of individuals who have been able to enter the executive ranks successfully?
I tend to work more so with the folks at the experienced in management to director level versus, true CISOs. But I would say from what I've seen just in the industry, I think to be an effective CISO, you really need to have experience across a broad array of disciplines. It helps to have that technical knowledge. But then, like you said, you got to make a business case to the rest of the C-suite to get the funding for your initiatives. So it's kind of a delicate balance. I think if you were to describe in a lot of people's minds what the ideal CISO looks like, it would be somebody who came up through the technical disciplines, whether it be pen testing or incident response or security operations, and worked in a few different subsets of security within that, say, security operations subset, and then, gained some business knowledge, maybe went and got their MBA, learned how to talk to other C-suite members, maybe worked in consulting. That's a great way to gain exposure to a lot of different environments and a lot of different types of companies. So, I think that's kind of the ideal role, and that's something that I tell a lot of people that they should do. Even if you're not in consulting right now, you should work in consulting for a while, because you'll discover pretty quickly what you like and don't like. And maybe you discover that you like working with financial services clients, and you can go be a director of security at a bank or something like that. And that gives you an idea of where your career path should go. But it's a balancing act.
That there's almost like several different CISO archetypes that exist. And I think like there's this kind of idea of like a CFO is a CFO or a CISO is a CISO, at least for anyone who's never been an executive, which I've never been a CISO or a CFO, but having talked to them, it's like some organizations are like if you're strong in engineering, like some of these startups, a CISO there could mean like you really need to be app security focused, but you're not a real executive. Like you're not like the CFO or anything. You're just over security. Whereas if you're the CISO of say Equifax, you're nearly celebrity status. So you've probably got to think about being in front of a camera and damage control and brand, especially post breach. So one exercise is just to decide what kind of CISO are you going to be. You're going to be the celebrity CISO, or you're going to be the application security, or you're going to be the compliance version of that. And that's kind of a surprise because they're definitely not the same mold. There's lots of variety. Like all the auditors, they might be the compliance version of that CISO. Whereas I've seen effective chief operating officers or someone with almost no technical background become the CISO because, like you said, they can communicate with that C-suite. They know how to put a budget together. They know how to do organizational change. And then they hire under them enough technical people to make it all make sense. So it's a super interesting type thing. What about, like you mentioned, like you're kind of working at the director level, like the upper end of top management before the C-suite. What's the most common backgrounds? Are these typically consultants that are entering those ranks, or people making lateral moves?
Depends on the discipline. I think in the super technical subdisciplines of security, usually it's people that came up through that particular vertical of security. So, say you were a pen tester, then you grew your way to be a senior pen tester, from junior to senior to then manager, then to director. I see pretty often people will switch disciplines, so there'll be like a specific, like a pen tester, say, in the consulting world, but then they'll move into the corporate side, and all of a sudden now they'll be more of a generalist, and now they're a manager of information security, and they have other security operations teams reporting to them. So it all depends on what you're able to get experience with, or who you say you go to a large corporation, you're able to sometimes switch functional teams within the organization and manage different teams than you were as an individual contributor. It just kind of depends on the company. I think the most effective leaders are the people that have lived it. As in the consulting world, a consultant, they work their way up to director in consulting. They tend to understand what it's like to be a consultant. So having lived it is important. But that's not to say that you can't be an effective leader of a technical team that doesn't mirror what your technical experience is. I think there's good managers that are born, and I think there's good managers that are made. But it is important to know if somebody's a good manager or not. And another common complaint I hear is, well, they were a really good technical person, but they're not a very good manager. And people are being promoted into roles that they shouldn't be necessarily. Just because you're an effective consultant does not mean you'll be a good director or manager.
Yeah. It's like the Peter principle. Like you rise to your level of incompetence. Have you ever heard of that? Like basically you're promoted into and then you're not effective at some point. But yeah, I've noticed that too. What about, these are questions that I'm hoping, I want to gain some insight here. Are there cush industries or just like either industries or sectors that from your experience, once people get there, they're just really happy? So maybe people hate, one industry or one type of job, but when they move into the security operations center for financial services, they're like, oh, they love it. And you kind of consistently see that. Or is it kind of just very dependent based on company and other factors?
Yeah, it all depends on what somebody's motivators are, and that's why in the recruiting process I spend the most time on motivators. I spend less time talking about somebody's qualifications than I do talking about their motivators, because I think that drives turnover or lack of turnover.
Yep.
and overall somebody's motivation level, happiness level long term in a position more than anything. I think a lot of people have potential that isn't necessarily realized in the position they're in, and if you can address that potential and show them a position that allows them to take advantage of more of that potential, they're more likely to stay there long term. So it all depends on the individual, really. Some people are motivated by money, in which case financial services is a great spot for them. And there's a lot of those companies in New York that are paying 200, 300, 400K a year for technical positions. I don't work on those positions, so I couldn't tell you, but I know some of my competitors do. It all depends again on what you really want to do. Do you want to be do you want to work in a highly regulated environment or not? Do you want to work in a flexible environment or not?
Yeah, I always advise colleagues and like people I try to mentor to beware of the big paycheck. And it's great to make a lot of money for sure, but I've also noticed that someone always had a disaster recently, and suddenly a security job fell out of the sky that's paying really well. So like I have a friend who about to become a CISO, and an organization came up, and the CISO position was like in the 400K range, all in, including bonus, which was a lot more than he was expecting. But after a little bit of research, he found out that he was a security organization of one, and that they had turnover like every 12 months prior to that. And they thought it was because they weren't paying enough, so they threw money at the problem to get a CISO in for various political reasons. And I was like, man, like go in there and get your payday, but you're probably going to be out in 12 months because that's just what it is. And he ultimately didn't take the position. But I've seen that time and time again. Someone had a disaster. So they throw that position out there. They try to throw money at the problem. So I always say, you want to get paid well, but also ask about how many resources they're willing to give to the position in terms of, do you have a budget allocated? Do you have staff that you're allocated? Do you have budget for tools and improvement projects? Or are you expected to develop the budget and they don't know because this is the first time they've ever even thought about it? So those types of things, especially at that executive level, are important, but also really fun. Because it's pretty fun to say no to a $400,000 job if we're a security director. But
I always say beware of the kitchen sink job descriptions. If they're looking for a security architect and a security assessor and a pen tester and an IR person all in the same job description, that's pretty telling.
100%.
I'm a big proponent of having the appropriate amount of staff for what you're trying to accomplish. And, you could pay 4 people less money versus trying to get one person at $400,000 to do everything. I think you'd be better off paying 4 people less money, and because you have the appropriate amount of people for the number of man hours that it's going to take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love this industry because you can tell we're at our infancy. Like it's exploding. We're getting headlines, but we haven't even figured out, like for sure, what a good career progression looks like for a security person. We don't have like leadership development and training programs for fledgling CISOs. Organizations don't even know where to put this person yet, or like the whole org structure. So it's an exciting time to be in security, and there's great career opportunities to be had. And Pete, I appreciate your time, and thank you for what you do in the industry, man, helping place people at good jobs and help them move up the ladder. If people want to reach out to you to find the dream position and make a lot of money, how can they find you?
LinkedIn. I live and die by LinkedIn, so just Pete Strouse and then PHR MBA. I'm out there. Should be easy to find. I'm probably the first person that pops up in a search for Pete Strouse. So
awesome. And if you're a Risk 360 employee, do not reach out to Pete. I will find out. I have a list. If you like this, kind of podcast, you want to hear about entrepreneurs, the security industry, privacy industry, you can check out Tuesday Morning Grind on any of the podcast apps, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever. If you want to look at our faces while we talk, you can check out YouTube. We have a playlist called Tuesday Morning Grind where we post every week. So thanks again, Pete. I appreciate your time.
All right. Yeah, appreciate it, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Talk soon.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.